Hey, Shane.
Yes, Vince?
Have you seen The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford?
No.
Okay.
But have you met Roger Deakins?
No.
Well, neither have I.
Well.
I've seen The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, and we met Roger Deakins.
This hand shook his hand.
I put this hand on his shoulder as I took a photo with him and James Deakins.
Nuts.
Wild.
Insane thing that happened to us
Yeah.
very recently.
So to set it up a tiny bit, I was scrolling on Instagram, and local filmmaker Ryan Pauly, shout out Ryan Pauly, shout out Bonus
Who we
Features,
also met.
who we also met, and is also incredibly nice and cool. And I'm actually gonna go. Well, this will be later. This will be back in time. But tomorrow I'm gonna go to a screening of his short film.
Which is very, very cool.
So
At the same place we met Roger Deakins.
At the same place.
Which I can't say enough to people.
So he had shared a post from, I believe it was the Dallas Film Commission, announcing this weekend with Roger Deakins, or this weekend with Team Deakins specifically. And so Thursday, June 8th, they were doing a screening of The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford with a book signing for Roger Deakins' book of photography, Byways. And then they were going to do a couple screenings of, I believe it was Sicario and No Country for Old Men. And Sicario actually had a guest that was the actor who played the big boss dude at the end of Sicario. So he was there for the screening of Sicario. I don't know if anybody was there for No Country for Old Men. And then Sunday, they did a screening of Blade Runner 2049 with a Q&A with Team Deakins after the fact. And so we went to both the live book signing and screening of The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Blah, 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 blah.
The longest movie title in
the longest
existence.
one, and also the screening of Blade Runner 2049 with the Q&A. So we literally got to meet Roger Deakins and have him sign the books that we, his book of photography,
Amongst other things for Shane.
amongst other things, namely a sheet of unbleached muslin that is now signed by Roger Deakins, and it has since been used as well.
Say, we used it in a shoot like days after.
Yeah. Shout out to Jordan for coming up with the idea for that.
It's so funny.
Yeah, so I made Roger Deakins laugh, which is probably one of the highlights of my life.
Look, I get it. You've married someone, but
I said one of. I didn't say the.
No. I'm saying the. No, dude, it was crazy. Like, legitimately, you walked up and you were like so nervous about it because he's Sir Roger Deakins.
Because he's literally knighted.
And so you walked up and you were like nervous, and then I just see him go, and I was like, oh, he got him. He got Roger Deakins.
Yeah,
which is awesome.
It's wild.
So I don't exactly know how we want to structure this. Talk about the event first or talk about the movie first. I don't think we have a ton to say about this movie, but enough that it's worth talking about.
Yeah.
Because it is worth saying. I had seen it before on Amazon or something. I've since bought the Blu-ray because I like the movie quite a bit.
Yeah.
But this screening we saw in 35 millimeter.
Yes.
Which was a very cool experience.
Very interesting way to watch that movie.
I think honestly maybe the ideal way to watch that movie a little bit.
The funny thing is, I don't know if Roger Deakins would agree.
Yeah.
Because he is just very much about wanting the clearest, cleanest, most accurate
depiction of life.
Depiction of either, like the movie or the, or of life, or, how you see it, So he's literally never shot on anamorphic. He doesn't do lens flares. He doesn't do.
Well, and my question with that, right? Because I agree with you. I think you're right. He talked about that at the Q&A.
Yeah.
But for this particular movie that is such a tone poem,
yeah.
His words, not mine, by the way.
Yeah.
I was in a room with Roger Deakins.
He says that all the time when he talks about that movie.
I didn't know that. But
yeah.
he talks about it as a tone poem. And like part of the immersion of that tone for me
Yeah.
is the old Western, like it feels
Right.
so immersive from that perspective.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like the story of the movie is interesting.
Yeah.
The tonality of that movie is far more interesting though.
Yeah.
And so I'd be curious if this was an exception for him, that he liked how like crinkly it looked, like
I would be
filmic it looked.
very interested. I should have. During the Q&A, I didn't get up and ask a question. Part of me wishes I got up and asked that question specifically. I thought about it after the fact. To be like, because again, like he talks a lot about like, he doesn't really shoot on film anymore because he just prefers digital. It's easier to use, and
You get dailies, you get
it's just easier to use, and it is a more, in his opinion, more accurate representation of his eye. He likes really sharp lenses. He doesn't like lens breathing. All these things. He doesn't like the camera or the lens to have a bunch of character. He wants it to be as accurate a representation of reality as possible, so it is more immersive. So it's interesting to watch that movie in 35 millimeter in all its imperfection, like, and that was definitely an imperfect copy of that movie.
Yeah.
I mean, even just switching between reels, you could hear differences in the audio quality.
Yeah.
It was an interesting way to watch it. But it also did kind of make it feel probably a little bit more immersive in some ways and less immersive in others. I mean, less immersive in the fact that I was noticing changes in audio quality between reels.
Yeah.
So I'd be very interested to see how he feels about that movie being presented in 35 mil.
Fascinating. And I don't remember, like, you can definitely tell when you have watched like the HD version of it on like a streaming service versus watching it in 35, but I can't remember how much difference it made.
I would be fascinated to watch that movie soon.
And I was going to say, I own a copy of it. Grab it off my shelf if you can find it. I own a lot of movies. That from that perspective was a very interesting time watching this movie, because I don't know that I'd ever knowingly been to like a film print screenning before.
Yeah, I've
only been to a few. It's like uncommon now, uncommon, but it's
the Hateful Eight.
That's true. We saw Hateful Eight in 70 mil.
70 mil Panavision.
That's the other one I did, and we're seeing Oppenheimer in 70 mil, which I cannot wait for.
Yeah, and then I went and saw Dunkirk in 70 mil. I know I've seen others in actual.
Like, I'm sure I have before and just not realized.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I wonder how old, like, when they fully made the switch to digital, like across the theater landscape.
Yeah.
You know what
so
I
like
mean?
how many movies in my childhood was I watching on?
Yeah. Because like there was definitely still a point when we were kids where they were still very much shooting in film in a way that like not quite as much anymore. So I'd be interested to see, I'd be interested when that like full, when every AMC theater had digital as opposed to film.
But anyway, that aside, moving on to the movie, and then we'll talk more about the actual like event of all of it. Thoughts, like loose thoughts on Jesse James or Robert Ford. I don't know what the shorthand for this one is. There's multiple, I think.
I knew very, very, very little about this movie going in. I knew Brad Pitt was in it and Casey Affleck was in it because they're on literally every image. I didn't even know who was playing who.
Oh, fascinating. Okay.
The funny thing was, I kind of thought Casey Affleck was Jesse James for some reason, because I feel like I had seen pictures of Jesse James and I thought that Casey Affleck looked a little bit more, I don't know. But I don't know why I made that assumption, but I just kind of felt that way. And so, yeah, I knew very little going in. I honestly, like up until just very recently, didn't even know that like Andrew Niccol was the guy who wrote and directed it. Wrote it too, right?
I believe so. It's adapted from a book, so he adapted it. Yeah, I believe.
Yeah, so I knew very little going in, and yeah, it's definitely a very interesting movie. It's like I would be fascinated to watch the like 4-hour version.
Yeah, they were talking about there was like they cut 40 minutes of it out, and here's the crazy part about this. They insinuated I think outright said that it was a lot of that time was cut post the actual assassination part of the movie.
Yeah.
Spoilers for this movie. It's in the title.
Spoilers for the fact that Jesse James got assassinated in the 1800s.
By Robert
Or
Ford.
1900s or whatever.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's like apparently the studio gave the note of like, oh, well, Brad Pitt's not in it. Why do we need to watch this movie anymore?
Yeah.
Because there's like it's a while after, but it's really not that long post that scene to the end of the movie. And I think there's a version of that movie that they really liked, that Team Deakins really liked, that was like a lot backloaded with a lot of the character study stuff. Because that's where the whole movie has like voiceover, which
Yeah.
I think used very effectively.
Yeah.
You know,
I did not know that was going to be a thing.
Yeah.
Well, so that was an interesting. I was
and
just like,
voiceover
oh,
is
this
just
is.
yeah, and voiceover is such a like touchy subject for people where there's all these rules on don't do it. It's
Right.
But this movie uses it in such an interesting way, but it also such an obvious way. Like it's not breaking the mold with how it's doing it.
No.
It is just like really effective.
Yeah.
And so then the last little bit has a lot of voiceover.
A lot. Yeah.
Kind of bridging it. And I think it works. Like I think the movie still fundamentally works. I think it's still a really good movie.
Yeah.
Even with, I would just be fascinated to see that longer version of it.
Yeah. Same.
Because it's already a long movie.
It's a long
and
one.
you kind of feel it.
You
like,
know, the funny thing, I didn't feel it as much in the theater, funny enough. Like, it didn't feel like it was like, I mean, like, is it actually like over 3 hours long?
it's 240.
240,
It's
okay.
current. So then the one they liked was 320, I think.
Got it. Yeah, no, like, it's long, but it doesn't feel like that. Like, it isn't like oppressively long.
No. I would not say that at all. But I do feel the length. Like on a second watch, I felt the length a little bit. But I also didn't remember. I remembered the key scenes and the key moments, but I forgot a lot of the like bridging sequences. You know, like there was certain after the scene where Casey Affleck talks about all the difference or the similarities between them, which is like a brilliant scene.
Yeah.
I had kind of forgotten a lot of what happened until we got to Jesse James's house.
Yeah.
But so from that perspective, it was really interesting to go back and watch again, knowing like all the big details and having to like re-experiencing a lot of things. But I could say the same thing about our viewing of Blade Runner. I've seen Blade Runner 2049 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
Watching it again in a theater, there were so many details that I had forgotten.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite movies, but there were so many moments that I was like, oh, I've never noticed how bloody that was, like how graphic that was.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
But anyway, Jesse James. So you like that? How do you feel about it? It's a tough one, right? Because it's so sprawling.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the divvying up of scenes between Jesse James and Robert Ford? Because there are sequences of this movie with neither of them.
Yeah.
Where both of them are just absent from the story.
Right.
Did that ever bother you, or did it still lend itself to it?
So I knew very little, but I knew a couple of small things. I knew a little bit about again, because like to give a tiny bit more backstory before of what I was doing before we watched this movie. I watched 23 Roger Deakins movies in like 18 days. All the while listening to the Team Deakins podcast and every interview I could watch on YouTube. So I was fully immersed in Roger Deakins lore by the time I met him and by the time we watched this movie. And so I had heard him talk a little bit about the longer cut and talk a little bit about his feelings on this movie. And so he mentions it's like, it's like a tone poem, and he mentions it's like isn't just about the event. It is about the people and the time that led to that event. So like I kind of knew going in that it would be kind of sprawling.
Yeah.
And so like, I mean, like it is a tone poem about, the passage of time and being,
remorse, I think.
Yeah.
Heavily remorseful.
Right.
Like, even before the actual event, I think it's dealing with a lot of those themes, right?
Right.
Like it opens the movie kind of flashing, the voiceover kind of flash about Jesse James's only remaining brother and how he like really couldn't stand Jesse after a while, so he left. But when he found out he died, he regretted it.
Yeah.
Like it kind of starts the movie there.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it starts the movie in a place where they are a bygone breed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this was their last train robbery and it was bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like they didn't even earn any money from it. So it's like it's like that we're starting from a place where they're already in the last legs of the Old West. You know what I mean? They are kind of an afterthought of American history.
An ending where the outlaws, the actual literal criminals, are performing a stage play about the event, right? Like, it shows how weird and twisted we've gone with that stuff. Which is also a fascinating idea to have that happened, that he played himself killing Jesse James,
and his brother played Jesse James. So weird.
It's a very, very, very strange thing to think about.
Yeah,
but I think the movie handles that really well, and the movie handles suspense like brilliantly.
Yeah,
right. Like the Jeremy Renner's death scene in it, where they're like shooting and they're like the one hit, and he drops the gun, and all the while Robert Ford's in the corner with his gun ready. And then he just looks at him. He's like, he's not going to do anything. Yeah. And he like slowly goes over and picks up his gun and goes to shoot. And then just last minute, bang.
Yeah.
Which like is a fascinating way to handle that sequence, right? Where like all these characters have motivations and reasons to do this and reasons not to do it. And so you're sitting there like, who's shooting first? Like, I think that's such a really, and the whole movie's littered with that.
Yeah. I mean, like it is a like, basically a 2-hour slow burn watching Jesse James slowly lose his mind a little bit, like not lose his mind, but like fully become like the like anxious, like like just fully dive into that part of him,
and watch the flip side of that, of somebody who idolized Jesse James fall out of love with him.
Yeah,
right. Like it shows both of these people have different journeys that end with the event, which is brilliantly played out.
Yeah.
After they kill him, his brother's like, it was an accident. Sam Rockwell's like, it was an accident. They rush out. I always think that's such a weird detail.
Yeah. Like, I feel like knowing that there's like a 40-minute longer cut, there are pieces that I feel like, I bet that was cut. You know what I mean? Like specifically with Jesse James's wife, I was like, I feel like she is a bigger part in a different movie.
Yeah.
And because she just like has like 6 lines and then Jesse James dies. Like, like she's
at the beginning and then the end. And then,
like it feels like she's just such an afterthought in this story. And yet she has this big, huge emotional moment. And it's like, I feel like there was more of you in a different version of this movie.
I could imagine a lot of the things went to after with Robert Ford more slowly realizing he regrets doing it.
Yeah.
And then more with like Jesse and his family. Those were the two things that I think would probably have been played out more had there been the longer cut.
I mean, that's what, what Roger Deakins said about what got cut was like, it was more about like what the stuff that got cut was more about the people around them. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't necessarily just about Jesse James or Robert Ford. A lot of what got cut was just like the kind of interchanging people, the crew around them. That was a lot of the stuff that got cut, including a lot of stuff that happened after the actual event.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny to think like it's a, almost 3-hour movie. And I'm like, I can feel like there are things are missing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
well, you and I joke, this is not a great example, but you and I joke that Eternals would be better if it was longer.
We're the only 2 people on the planet that actually wished Eternals was longer.
Yeah.
The one thing that they should have made into a TV show, they made into a movie. And all the movies that they made, and all the TV shows that they've made should have been made into movies.
Yeah. Hilarious. We're a couple of funny guys. Anyway, so talking about all that, let's talk about this movie visually speaking. Specifically, the most famous part of this movie, the train robbery sequence.
Yeah. Perfect.
Insane. Like, talk about a feat of cinematography.
Yeah.
It is nuts what they're able to pull off.
Yeah.
And he talked about it before the Q&A, but in the intro, kind of, he answered a couple questions in intro, and talked about how much the movie goes to just all black.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and how so often directors will be like, oh, I want a silhouette. Oh, I can't see their face.
Yeah.
Well, then it's not a silhouette, dude.
Right.
Like, and how unafraid this movie is to have very little information actually on the screen until you need it.
Yeah.
And that train robbery sequence is a masterclass in that.
It is phenomenal.
Like, the shot where the train stops and the smoke, or like the steam and smoke just envelop Jesse standing on there. It's like
insane.
Some of the best cinematography ever.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the movie is also gorgeous.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's the thing is like that that train robbery, it isn't super stylized in any crazy way. You know what I mean? Like, probably the most like stylish shot is in the whole thing is the shot of where it's the camera's looking directly at the train as the train's coming, and the train like crashes into the camera and it goes with it. That's probably the most like stylish shot.
Yeah.
The rest of it is just real.
Simple camera moves and then great lighting.
Yeah, it's just like there isn't like this gigantic fake moon that is lighting up every. No, it's like it's just like the candlelight of the the lanterns that they're holding, the bright light of the front of the train, and the inside of the train.
Well, dude, I think Deakins is the master of that.
Yeah.
If one of my favorite scenes ever is the last scene in Sicario when he's trying to get her to sign the paper saying everything was legitimate.
Yeah.
The way that scene is played out, it's really comprised of like 9 or 10 shots total.
Yeah.
And like 2 camera moves.
Yeah.
And none of the shots are flashy.
No.
They're all like very simple, very matter of fact, but it's one of the best shot scenes of all time.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the way the blocking plays out, the way it's shadowed and dark, and the way the camera moves reveal the information.
Yeah.
None of it is hard. You could do all of it, literally all of it, with a tripod and a Dana dolly.
Yeah.
That's all you need to get all of those camera moves. And it's fascinating to watch something like that and it be so brilliant. But there's also these directors who move cameras in brilliant, bombastic, Edgar Wright.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That is equally as valid.
Right.
But like, I think Roger Deakins is the master of simplicity when it comes to where to put the camera.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he doesn't need it. He knows his compositions and his lighting are so brilliant that if the blocking works, they're just going to work.
Yeah.
And I, Jesse James is a great example of that. There's none of these big, massive camera moves other than that one really flashy one where like the train hits it and it goes back.
Yeah, it's like the one thing. I mean, yeah, I think he's the master of simplicity, of motivated light and simplicity. You know what I mean? Like, nothing is superfluous, nothing is over the top. It's just fucking rock solid.
Yeah.
You know?
And I'm curious, just because you've watched so many movies, do you think there's like one film where he like pops off with like camera moves more than anything else, or has he remained pretty consistent?
I mean,
because like you could talk about like Rango, that some of his animated works a bit because he has more room to like do a few like impossible-ish things.
And I imagine he only had so much like say in a lot of that. I think for the most part, a lot of what his work in the animation stuff that he has done is more about like lighting and that kind of thing, as opposed to like camera movement and that kind of thing. I don't think he's actually all that involved in that aspect of it, because he's like a consultant more than he is like the actual cinematographer or anything. But I mean, like the first thing that my mind jumps to is a Hudsucker Proxy.
Yeah,
like there's quite a bit of movement in that movie, and but it's also kind of like almost more of like a slapstick comedy in a way that like so few of his others are. I mean, like, and when I talk about movement, like Jarhead, it's like that entire movie is like entirely handheld.
Yeah.
With very few exceptions.
And then you talk about like 1917, but that's more like,
and then 1917,
that's the hook of 1917.
Right.
And even then, a lot of the camera moves themselves aren't all that insane. It's a lot of like holding on a scene and then like panning. It's just the fact that they're so prolonged that makes it so crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just following the movement of the subjects, of the lead actors,
versus somebody like I'm trying to think. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, that one fight scene in the hallway where it's like these massive, crazy camera moves that are like bombastic is the only way to describe it.
Right.
It's like he doesn't do that.
No, I mean, like, yeah, I legitimately think the closest version of that is like 1917, just because there is, I mean, it is like just so movement focused, you know what I mean? Of these two characters getting, getting to their destination. And then something like Hudsucker Proxy, where it's like there is quite a bit of movement on these wide angle lenses that make everything so big and, you know, like theatrical in a way that a lot of his other cinematography just like kind of isn't. That being said, it still very much serves the story. And like, I love Hudsucker Proxy, so
I'm like desperate to see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that is like such a big impression, especially after watching him make a Western and then going to a neo-noir sci-fi movie, and how the simplicity remains the same. Like Blade Runner, while it has these crazy intricate shots, a lot of the camera, like I said, still very simple.
Yeah.
Like it's the most gorgeous stuff you'll ever see in your life, but the camera's on sticks, dude.
Yeah.
Like it's not moving that much.
No, like there's no in all of his work, there are no impossible camera moves. You know what I mean? There's nothing that can't be done with simple, you know, like the most extravagant thing you would find in any of his work is like something in a helicopter. Like that is as extravagant as he gets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, he wants like, I mean, that's the thing is like, he talks often about, he wants his work to not draw attention to itself. He wants you to get fully immersed in the world and not pay attention to what the camera's doing.
Yeah.
And so if he's setting up all these crazy lights and moving the camera all over the place, you're focusing on what he's doing. And he literally sees that as a failure.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if you point out a specific shot that you love from a movie, he sees that as a failure, which I think is which is just insane to me.
I think there's like a line to be walked there, right? Where it's like, well, at a certain point you do need shots to be pretty, you know what I mean? And that's his entire body of work. Talking about Jesse James specifically, like we were saying, that the train robbery sequence where like the smoke comes and hits him, it's like
gorgeous,
but it is also completely telling the story.
Yeah, it is.
Like that's the difference. And he said this in the Q&A, which we'll talk about a little bit. Something I say all the time about when I watch short films is I'm like, oh, you were way too invested in how this looked, which is a very weird thing to say about a visual medium.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that and how he put it, he's like, oh, I'm not doing flashy to be flashy.
Yeah.
He's like, if I have a flashy shot, it's because it's informing the script, the character, the moment, whatever it is. It's like Blade Runner and this movie, so many of the scenes are just like over-the-shoulder conversations.
Yeah.
Which is one of the fundamental pieces of filmmaking. He doesn't try to break the mold. He just composes a beautiful shot.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's enough. You know what I mean? Anyway, it's just something that really like stuck out to me watching two different movies in his filmography that are so vastly different, split by like 2 decades.
Yeah.
And still seeing like the fundamental pieces of like cinema that he's just always been good at.
Yeah, I mean, he's just, you know, like he doesn't, I mean, exactly like what you said, like he's not doing flashy for flashy's sake. He's doing only exactly what he thinks that serves the story, you know, as best as possible. And then there are going to be certain directors that are going to be asking for, you know, their vision is some heightened version of reality. I mean, that's what he talks about when he talks about like his work on Hudsuckers. Like it's like a heightened version of reality. It's a reality.
Yeah.
It's just a heightened version of our own reality.
Well, it's like where it's so like much of the Coen's work, right? Just in general.
But something like Sicario is not a very heightened version of our reality at all. It's, you know, it is a different reality because it's not real life, but it is like as close as possible.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, like, and then you have a Coen's brothers movies like No Country for Old Men. Like that is also very like close to reality. Or, you know, Fargo, like the way he talks about the kind of the difference between Hudsucker. They went from Hudsucker to Fargo, where it's like Hudsucker has all these like is more hyper real, and then Fargo, they intentionally wanted it to feel a little bit more like a docudrama, so they're using a bit longer lenses and, you know, keeping things a little bit further from the action just to make it feel a little bit more like a documentary, as opposed to, you know, this heightened fantasy world that, you know, that the Hudsucker Proxy lives in.
Yeah. And I love that, right?
Yeah.
Like I love this, but I just also love his philosophy on it, because I think it's the philosophy that directors should have, that writers should have, that everyone should have. It's like, what is the story lending itself to? Is the story lending itself to big things, or is the story lending it to small moments, right? Like find that out. That's the job of a storyteller, is to take a story and tell it in a way that's interesting.
Yeah.
Not flashy, not insane, interesting. And if flashy and insane is the interesting thing, then by all means do that. But like Jesse James is not that. You know what I mean? Jesse James is this, like you said, like a tone poem, this very like meditative thing. So he just holds shots, you know what I mean? Like long time. You see really weird, interesting things shot in very matter-of-fact ways.
Yeah.
Like when Jesse starts crying after beating up on the kid.
Yeah.
It's not like some big push-in where you all of a sudden... It's just like he's standing in the background of a shot and you just see he starts crying. Like, it's nuts. Yeah. It's so effective. Yeah. And I wish more people did stuff like that.
No, I agree. I mean, but on the flip side of that, about Jesse James, it's like at the same time, he indulges in something that he almost never does, which is like he doesn't really do like, like I said, like earlier, like the lenses that he chooses are usually like he tries to find the sharpest lenses with the least amount of artifacts. And in this movie, he uses like a trick lens. Yeah. He actually like had Otto Nemitz. He actually had Otto Nemitz design I think they call it the deaconizer now.
I love that.
They had a design a lens or a like a lens attachment essentially, where it took the front element of a different lens and attach it reversed to the front of a different lens, so you can get that that like center. I have a lens that's very similar actually. I flipped the front element of a Mir 1B, which is an old Russian lens. And so what it does is it makes the center focused, but the edges get super out of focus, and you even get some like color fringing and stuff like that. It's like that's all stuff he never does. Yeah. He does not indulge in that usually. But for this, it's an interesting idea. It's interesting that of all movies for him to indulge in something like this, which I think this was something that was like requested by Andrew Niccol, that these scenes would be like dreamlike and like have, and like you watch a movie like Serious Man where, they're getting high on the couch and like I'm pretty sure they're using like a tilt shift lens or something like that. So it's like he does indulge in that sometimes if it fits the narrative, if it fits the story, if it fits what the character's going through at that moment. But it's just interesting, like, again, like he doesn't really indulge in that kind of thing very often. But when he does, it's super effective and instantly iconic. Yeah. It's funny? When I watched the movie, I was like, man, Red Dead Redemption 2 really just aped like every visual thing from this movie that it could. Like it does the train robbery sequence. Yeah. It does all of those dream kind of sequences. It's like, man, y'all just aped up. I mean, even the story itself is like, Dutch is like slowly like kind of losing his mind and losing his grip on trusting the crew around him, and the crew crumbles. And like, I mean, man, Red Dead Redemption 2 really just cribbed that entire movie.
I need to play Red Dead 2. I still haven't.
It cribs so much from the assassination of Jesse James. It's not even funny.
Fascinating. Now I desperately want to play it.
Yeah. I mean, haven't you played some of it?
I played a little bit, not enough to like really get into it. It felt like another job for me, and I didn't want another job at the time. But now maybe I do. Maybe I want to work 2 jobs. One
good game, imperfect but good.
Yeah. Well. Do you have any other thoughts, like big things you want to talk about this movie, or do you want to just quickly go over lessons?
Man, there are so many people in this movie.
Yeah, no, a lot of people.
Crap,
huge
the cast is huge and phenomenal.
Yeah, everyone in it's great too.
Everyone in it is so good. Mm-hmm. I like it. Just people kept popping up and be like, "The hell." Yeah. Freaking Sam Shepard, didn't know you were going to be in that.
Mark Brandanowitz is in this movie.
Mark Brandanowitz is in there. Yeah. Freaking
Hawkeye.
Hawkeye's in there. Like, man, they just got them all on the track. It's wild. Yeah. No, it's a good. Honestly, I liked it quite a bit. I need to watch it again. Because I definitely want to watch it not in 35 millimeter.
And just see the difference.
Just to see the difference. Like just and just to kind of feel a different feeling there. Yeah. But yeah, what about you? What any other thoughts before we get on?
Just that I love westerns, you know what I mean? Like I love like true cowboy westerns. I love neo westerns. Like if I were ever to want to make one, I would want to make a neo western. Yeah. But I love a good cowboy western, and this is a really great one. Yeah. So watch it. I mean, it's really cool.
Yeah. It's a good one. It's a weird one.
Do you have any lessons you want to take from it?
I mean, I think there is something to be said about the kind of like the tone poem nature about this that is incredibly interesting, that I actually really enjoyed. Where it isn't just about one person's life over a period of 2 weeks. It's like it tells kind of like the end of an era. Like, it's a movie about the end of the Old West in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
With that comes the regret and the challenges of a new world, and so I think there is a way that you can tell stories like this, kind of tell these sprawling narratives without it feeling too off the beaten path. You know what I mean? And again, I'd be fascinated to watch the longer cut of this, just to see what else they wanted to include to make it even. I mean, like, honestly, it would be even more of like a tone poem.
Yeah.
Than it is in its current state. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything super concrete. What about you?
My lesson is really on character. I know we've been talking a lot about visuals, Roger Deakins, but I want to come back to character. This movie like paints Jesse as this like paranoid, right? Like increasingly so, paranoid figure, never takes his guns off. He's pretty arrogant, but he's also smart in ways that like are sneaky. And he dies because he chooses to. Yeah. Like that's the big like, and who knows like real life what happened, but like in reality, that scene, right, they make a point to show him never taking his guns off. He has them in his hands when he's sleeping. Yeah. The whole movie. And he dies because he takes his guns off and lets someone kill him. Yeah. And they don't explicitly say that, right? Like you just watch this man who, after reading something officially, you can see it in Brad Pitt's performance. He's officially tired. Yeah. And that's why he dies. And I think that's a fascinating thing because that handled improperly leads to a break in character where it doesn't make sense. It's so pivotal, but it doesn't make sense, right? Like it's like Luke Skywalker for a lot of people choosing not to be a Jedi doesn't work. When in reality, if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, it makes a lot of sense. Last Jedi, you know what I mean? I do like that movie. Yeah. But it's that type of thing, right? It's like if you watch a movie where somebody's outright good the entire time and he's hardly tested on that fact, and then he does something terrible, you're like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would he do that? Yeah. This movie earns that. This movie, by the end of it, you're like, man, Jesse James is tired and just ready to get shot in the face. Right. And I think that's like a fascinating thing. And I want to watch this movie again and really like pinpoint those moments that make that believable. Yeah. Because it's so easy to fuck up. Yeah, no kidding. And like, again, it's like Blade Runner. Blade Runner does a similar thing where it's like, he's this obedient dude by literal design, and he chooses to rebel against that in the smallest possible way. Yeah. Right? It's fascinating. And he dies for it. Like, he fucking dies for it. And so in this one, I just think it's interesting that Jesse does that's his journey, is the only reason he dies is because he gave up. Yeah. She's like, I don't want to do this anymore, and dies. And I think that's really, really, really interesting. And it's something that I don't quite understand how they pull off as well as they do. But watching it the second time, it was really impressive on me. I was like, oh, wow, that's actually really interesting, though, how much of this movie is him fighting so hard, and then it's finally when he just like unclenches his fist is when he goes. Yeah. I think that's really cool. I like that a lot. That's something I just will be thinking about more than a lesson, like thinking about how to pull that type of character arc off. Yeah. Really interesting. Really good movie. I like it quite a bit.
Jesse James. Or the Assassination of Jesse James with the Cover Award.
There we are. Anyway, let's talk about the fact that we met Roger Deakins.
Yeah, that was wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, waiting in line, got an autograph.
Yeah.
Shook his hand, took a picture. This is important that everyone at home knows this.
Yeah.
I'm taller than Roger Deakins.
This guy's taller than Roger Deakins.
I have photographic proof that I'm taller than Roger Deakins. So I got that on him.
You got that one thing.
Basically nothing else, but it's fine.
You got long hair.
I do have long hair.
And it's dark.
And
his hair is white.
His hair is white.
But it looks good on him.
I have more than one outfit.
This is true.
Literally during the Q&A, somebody said, so like, what kind of things you always like comforts on set that you always have like comfy pair of shoes? Like, what do you wear? And he just pointed at his boots.
He just picked up his foot.
It was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the positives first and then gripe on one or two things about not Roger Deakins. He was amazing. James Deakins, amazing.
Yeah.
On the fucking questions that were asked, but that'll be in a second. Positives of the event for you, like
or specifically the Q&A or both?
Both. Why not?
Yeah. I mean, I literally got to fucking meet Roger Deakins. That's a huge positive. Literally, with the event came a copy of his book that both him and James signed, which is incredibly cool. A beautiful, wonderful photography in there. It's interesting to hear how he talks about how he sees them as completely separate.
Yeah.
He just sees them as completely separate. People will be like, talk to me. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear like your thoughts on how you see cinematography and also your photography. And like, he's just like, they're separate. It's like, that being said, they're incredibly different. All of his photography is not lit. It's all kind of like, documentary kind of,
much more naturalistic.
Yeah. I mean, it's all just street photography and, or nature. I don't think any of it was posed in any way, shape, or form or lit in any way, shape, or form. And it's all in black and white. It's a wonderful, wonderful book, and I'm so glad to have it. And, I got to make Roger Deakins laugh.
You made him like genuinely laugh.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
So to tell that story a little bit. So before the event, I was talking to a friend of the pod, Jordan. And he was like, oh, you should get him to sign a sheet of unbleached Muzz. And I was like, bet. And so I brought the Muzz up there. So you put your book down and then they sign it. And so, I put my book down. I'm like, how you guys doing? You guys tired yet? And they were like, a little bit. And then after that, I put the unbleached muslin on the table. I was like, would you be willing to sign some unbleached muslin as well? And so Roger like literally sat back in his chair and kind of threw his head back and laughed. And he said, so where'd you come up with that? Or where'd you get the idea for that? Whatever it was. And I was like, a friend of mine, I told him I was coming to this and he told me I should do it. And so as I was taking the picture with him, he's like, you should tell him, I don't use it anymore. I only use hard light. And so I was like, oh my God, that's so good. And so like, so when I saw, friend of the pod, Jordan, I literally told him that story. I was like, yeah, when I put it on the table, it was actually kind of miffed. And he was like, yeah, I don't even use it anymore. Like I only use hard light. And Jordan was like, what? And then I was like, no, I'm kidding. Literally, not only did I make him laugh, he then set me up for another opportunity to be funny. And honestly, it worked like a charm. It was great. That was a wonderful moment. And yeah, it was great.
It was amazing. The Q&A is cool. We got to go see one of our favorite things.
Yeah.
Ever. You and I have an affinity for fucking loving Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah.
As one of like the great movies.
Yeah.
So we got to go watch that in a theater again. And like I said, super cool experience to like have all the hype of like, oh, there's going to be a Q&A with the guy who shot this actor. Yeah. So you're hyper focused on all the visuals and like all the little details you realize you don't notice when you watch at home or watch even 10% less focused on it. Brilliant. I think that's one of the great movies. I fucking love that movie. And then afterwards, having a Q&A with Roger Deakins.
Yeah.
And I will say that it was really interesting.
Yeah.
He had a lot of really fascinating things to say.
Yeah.
I wish, and Meg and I talked about this, I wish that there was a moderator because the head of the Dallas Film Commission just kind of opened it up to the crowd instead of like warming up or fielding questions or anything.
Yeah.
And I wish he took like 15% more interest in going, no, like let's next question. You know what I mean? Like,
I wish what they should have done is just get questions from the audience beforehand.
Yeah, and pick
or like whether it was
submit on Twitter or something.
There were much better way or much more there's just much better ways to do it than they did.
Yeah.
And it opened it up to a lot of some actually weird, inappropriate questions.
Yeah.
And then some just like people who don't know enough about the person that they're asking questions of.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
Like it was just clear. It was just like, man, if you have listened to a single interview of this dude, you know that was not something you not should have said or just not something he would respond to positively.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I mean, like I said, like, you know, that thing, the thing of like, you know, if you bring up a specific shot as being beautiful as compared to the rest of the movie or the rest of cinema, he sees that as a failure.
Yeah.
So literally somebody asked a question and he literally responded as like, oh, well then I've failed.
Yeah.
You saying that makes me think I've failed.
Yeah.
Which like, I mean, which is like a tough thing to hear. Like I bet that dude didn't feel good after that. But I shout out to both Roger and James for being as patient as they were, because there were definitely some really bad questions.
People, as my girlfriend Breck pointed out, are practicing their tight five.
Yeah, man. A lot of them went up there to try to be funny or to try to tell some beautiful story about.
So some beautiful story about whatever. God, ask a question.
Yeah,
it's like there's okay for context, right?
A little bit of context.
So like, look, it was question after question, and you and I were sitting in the back, like, Jesus, this is weird.
It was weird.
And Breck was in line.
Yeah.
To ask a question.
Yeah.
And she had a very fun, interesting question to ask.
Great question and got a great answer.
She really did. She got a great answer from him specifically. So anyway, she's doing that. She's in line. She's texting us being like, these people are weird. And I was like, I know. Me and Shane are back here having secondhand embarrassment so hard right now.
I wanted to pop my eyes out of my skull and squish them.
And the interesting thing is, one of the questions that I thought was good before Breck's question, right? Like, was what contemporary movies have you really liked from like this year?
Yeah.
I thought that was a really insightful question, because I'm a big believer in like, yes, study the past, but also know what's going on right now. Like I preach that all the time.
Yeah.
And they were both kind of like, I don't know, but I think that's more because they've been doing a book tour or something like that. Like they've been busy doing their podcast, all that stuff. So like I handled that, but I got to be in a room where Roger Deakins addressed the Batman and how phenomenally well shot it was. Yeah. I just don't want to be gross, but it was a little bit a turn on for me. I loved it, maybe even. Because he's like had that quote from that interview, which he also addressed, funnily enough. Yeah. Where he was just talking about how phenomenal it was, maybe the best shot movie of last year.
Yeah.
Which it was. Let's just be clear. It's like that and Nope, the two movies that didn't get nominated.
Literally.
Anyway, so you talked about that, but then Brett got up and asked a really fun question. She was asking about horror movies. Like he shot things that are horror influenced. And she's like, what are some of your favorites? Like what have they influenced your work at all?
Yeah.
And he kind of leaned back and he was like, oh, okay. And he was like thinking for a second. He referenced some ones I had never heard of. Yeah. And then he referenced like Nosferatu.
Yeah.
It's one of his favorites. And then he just kind of goes, I love horror movies. I would love to make one. Yeah. And everyone in that audience went, like no joke. There was a verbal like response to it.
Yeah.
Because it was a really good question.
Great question.
I also think that because, I mean, just to talk about the Batman thing, and he talked about that as being like the reason it didn't get nominated was elitism.
Yeah.
Right. And horror is just now
snobbery.
Snobbery, as the British man would say.
Yeah.
And how that kind of stuff. But like horror is still very much a piece of genre filmmaking, even though, and I say this all the time, it's the coolest stuff in cinema right now.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting to hear somebody who's done like all these different genres and decades long career go, I'd really like to make one of those. And I was like, oh, please, somebody let him.
Yeah.
So that was like a really fun part of it. Like there were good questions asked. I don't want to make it seem like there weren't good questions.
No.
And he always found something to like talk about.
Yeah. I just felt bad because there were several questions that were like slightly rephrased, but essentially the same question. Especially the ones that he felt like he couldn't really answer well. You know what I mean? It's like, quit asking the same question, guys. Like he answered this and he did not. Like, and it was clear, like, he didn't agree with the idea of the question. So it's like, let's move on.
Yeah.
Like, the funny thing was I had an idea for a question and I am glad I didn't go up and ask it, because the question I was going to ask was, he talks a lot about reading. He loves reading. And Blade Runner 2049 is based off of Blade Runner, famously based off of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. So with that in mind, and he also talks about that reading is a part of his process. Like when he talks about preparing for some movies, he talks about the books that he read to prepare, whether it was based off of a book or not. It's like in preparation for this movie, I watched this book that is not about that movie is not based off of. And so I was going to ask him why is reading an important part of a visual process? You're creating the visuals of the movie. Why is reading an important part of that process? And then second, if you were to, what science fiction book would you like to either be a part of adapting or see adapted? I'm glad I didn't ask, because somebody asked a very similar question. He said, I don't know.
Well, I'll say the first part of that is a very insightful question.
Yeah, the first part.
The first part is genuinely kind of a brilliant question for the master of cinematography.
Yeah.
Just to go, how does that get you in the mindset? I think that's brilliant. The second one is just a bit more like, what's your favorite movie, Roger Deakins? It's
right.
It has that connotation of oh no, I have to not.
He talks so often about how, he's talked multiple times about how he loves science fiction. And there isn't a lot of science fiction being made.
There's a lot of science
fantasy.
And which he said in the room too, which I was like, whoa.
Yeah. And so it's like, I'd be really interested to hear what some of his favorite science fiction novels are that may or may not have been made into a feature film or into a movie that we haven't seen yet. Somebody asked a similar question. It was like, what book would you, wasn't specific to science fiction. Just what book would you want to see made or want to be a part of making? But yeah, I like that, and the Assassination of Jesse James question of you have talked a lot about how you've made the switch from film to digital. I'd be really interested to hear his thoughts on those movies being presented in film still, even though there probably is a cleaner, more accurate version. Is there something to be said for because that's the thing is when we were watching that movie, it really did feel like an old movie. Yeah. It felt like a movie from a bygone era when it's not that old.
Yeah.
But it felt way older than it actually is.
Yeah.
Just by being presented in 35 millimeter. So I think that would be an interesting question to get answered.
I completely agree. And because reading novels is so important for screenwriting, right?
Yeah.
So, but you think of writing to writing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The connection is very clear. So, reading to visuals, it's that's, I think that's a very insightful, interesting question.
I have the feeling I know what his answer would be. Just to talk about to understand the story even better, or the time or the place or the tone, not necessarily from a visual standpoint. Because that's the thing is when he's talking about his visuals, he's talking about them from a story perspective, from a character perspective. And so his reading, I imagine, would be a way for him to get even further into the mind of the character or the world that he's trying to create. I imagine that would be something, proximity of what he might say.
Yeah.
But that would have been cool to be
from his mouth. Would have been awesome.
Would have been dope.
Do you have any other things you want to talk about the Q&A? I have one last thought, but I want to save it for the end of the discussion.
No, I also just love him and James, their partnership. And I love that she is so active in all of these things that he's doing for the community, quote unquote. I mean, it's their podcast together. It's this was a Q&A with Team Deakins, not with Roger Deakins.
And she had incredibly insightful things to say.
She had wonderful, insightful things to say. For a lot of questions, she was able to give much more insightful questions, much more insightful answers than he did.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this is one thing I actually said to both of them is I work very closely with my wife. We're both creative people. So the idea that, you can be in an industry like this together with your partner and still want to be together at the end of the day, is hugely inspiring. And so, shout out Roger and James. You guys are the ultimate ship couple, whatever.
I didn't realize you had said that to him. That's very touching. It was very sweet. The last thing I want to say is something he said during the Q&A. I'm gonna mess up the quote. But essentially what he said is he's like, nobody gets where they're going because then they would stop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like nobody achieves what they set out to do because then why would they keep going?
Yeah.
I thought that was one of the most inspiring things I've ever heard.
Yeah.
From the man who is, I think, definitively the greatest cinematographer who has ever lived.
Yeah.
To say that he still doesn't feel like he's got where he set out to go because you never do.
Yeah.
And why would you want to?
Yeah.
Is deeply inspiring to me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a reiteration of nothing will ever be perfect. Nothing will ever, you'll never do this. It's like, it's adjustments and adaptation, but like just having him say it that way was so fascinating to me where it's like, it's literally the journey.
Yeah.
The destination is so far away. You'll never get there. No one will.
Yeah.
It's all about the journey and all about what you do with that journey. And
that's storytelling. That's, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
I was so taken by that. I thought that was amazing.
There were two other quotes that I pulled that I also loved.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can pull it real quick. The first one was dark doesn't look dark unless you have light to contrast it.
Yeah.
Which, like, just from a cinematography perspective is like a great way of describing that. But then also, if you just think about it for a second of like all of storytelling from that perspective of like dark isn't truly dark unless you have light to contrast it. You know what I mean? Like, or you think of a movie like, Blade Runner from that perspective of like, of the light and dark in all of us. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just absolutely loved the way that he said that. And then the other thing that he said was, if you don't have restrictions, you wouldn't have anything to react against.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I loved that. Cause they were talking about budgets. I can't remember, what the specific question was, but talking about kind of like small versus large budgets. And he was like, like I don't need or want an infinite budget because the budget is what informs the decisions that we're making. It's like the budget's an important part of the process. Because like he said, like if I didn't have a restriction in that I wouldn't have something to react against, you wouldn't have the creative problem solving that is so fundamental to why this job is so fascinating and why he loves to do it is that creative problem solving of how can I create this world, and B, how can I create that world within this budget?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's part, like it's you can look at it cynically of like, oh, like, art, shouldn't be restricted by money and blah, but like at the same time, it's like, that's human, that's society. Yeah. It's like, but at the same time, those restrictions allow you to create something to react against it.
Yeah.
It's a great way of putting it.
I think both of those quotes are genuinely beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like if you think about it from just a little bit outside of the direct context, it's like they actually like are just absolutely beautiful ideas.
Yeah. Anyway, we met Roger Deakins.
I watched 25 movies in 22 days.
Still so important that I'm taller than him. I think that's something.
And I got him to sign on Bleach Muzz.
You did. That we then used on a shoot we were on like 2 days later. We hoisted it above the cast and definitively stated that the Roger Deakins Muzz was in the air.
He was truly looking down on all of us.
I love it. So yeah, I mean, just real fast, do you have any recommendations? I mean, you just said 25 movies. Do you have like a top 3 that like really stuck out to you of new ones that you had watched?
The top 3 of the new ones that I watched were definitely Hudsucker Proxy. I really liked that. And the funny thing is, I kind of knew I would in a weird way. I don't know why. I knew very little about that movie, but I knew I'd really like it. The next one was The Man Who Wasn't There. Nobody fucking talks about that movie, and I can't believe it. That movie is like really cool and really weird, and it's beautiful. It's black and white, very, very noir. But Joel Cohen tells a story about the man who wasn't there. He was meeting the governor of Texas, whatever her name was back in the day. And she asked him, "What are you working on right now?" And he's like, "Oh, it's a movie called The Man Who Wasn't There." And she asked, "So what's that about?" And it's like, and she says, or he said, "It's about a barber who wants to be a dry cleaner." And she goes, I'm trying really hard to be excited for that." And that is exactly what that movie is about. Like, that's a really incredibly accurate description of what that movie's about. And it's really good in a way that I don't think anybody understands. And then the third one is Jarhead. I liked Jarhead quite a bit.
I like Jarhead a lot. I think that's a really good movie.
Yeah.
And then you described it well. As far as anti-war films go, it's one of the greats.
Yeah.
Because you're right. There's nothing in that movie that makes war seem
glorious
interesting.
about that movie in any way, shape, or form. There's no like honor or glory. It is just people being terribly, awfully depressed in the desert.
Yeah. Yeah. Seeking honor and glory.
Yeah.
Like,
trying for literally the most emotional scene. Well, that might be a spoiler.
it's a spoiler, but I know that the most emotional scene of the movie is like, oh man, what are we arguing about?
Literally.
Yeah.
No, that one's a good one. That one's, I like that one quite a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I were to, make a recommendation from the new ones that I watched, it would be one of those three, or all three of those.
They are, I've seen Jarhead. So
yeah.
Anyway, my recommendation, to keep it Deakins, I'm just gonna recommend 2049. Like,
I thought about doing the same.
Watching it again, I was just like every time I watch it, I'm like reminded how great it is. Right, I was just like re-enamored with it. And I will say this: like, watching that movie while in a relationship is a very different experience.
Interesting.
Like, it's so much more about like, and I've always said this, right? Like, that's a movie about love.
Yeah.
Like, it's a movie about choosing to break out of bonds because of love.
Yeah.
Choosing to sacrifice because of love and losing love along the way.
Yeah.
Right? Like Brett kind of put it, it's like the two most human characters in this movie are not human.
Yeah.
And it's I've always known it's like questions of what is love, but like watching it with the person that I'm literally in a relationship with was a really interesting experience. It made a lot of that movie a lot tougher to watch.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there was a couple sequences where I was like, oh man, I'm feeling a little too seen right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a very new experience for me, that movie, which is that goes to show you, rewatch stuff because you can change and you will change and the thing will change because of you.
I won't.
Fair enough. Anyway, so in summation, we met Roger Deakins.
Yeah.
I'm taller than him. Shane got him to sign Unbleached Muzz and made Roger Deakins laugh and set him up for a joke later.
Yeah.
Pretty great weekend, all things considered.
Yeah. I think next time we're going to be talking about my journey through Deakins.
Yeah, we're probably going to do just a fun little episode of you kind of
I'll
going
probably
through
like
them.
what we might do is I might just have you watch a couple of the movies that you haven't seen.
Yeah.
Specifically, I think we'll be talking about Hudsucker.
Yeah.
And I probably might get you to watch The Man Who Wasn't There too, because that was a good one.
I'm down. I really want to watch Hudsucker, and you have me very curious about The Man Who Wasn't There.
Yeah. If somebody watched it and they didn't really like it all that much, I wouldn't be all that surprised, but I think they would be wrong.
Fascinating.
On both counts.
Cannot wait.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you've got a bunch of stuff to watch. We referenced a lot of things in this episode. Go down a Roger Deakins rabbit hole. You will not be disappointed. All of his movies are gorgeous and like master classes in what they are, like whatever the specific movie is. So yeah, you should go watch those things, or don't. I don't know. Live your life.